Okay, great. Thank you all for coming. So the premise of this talk is really that currently there's a lot of high quality resources on the technical elements of rollups, including the cryptographical elements and how they're implemented, as well as a lot of non-technical resources on why rollups are important to kind of the scaling mission of blockchains and Web3. But really, there's a lack of what this rollup technology looks like on a day-to-day from the developer's perspective. So specifically, how a rollup works in a dApp, how to use the tooling to build a rollup in a dApp, and the respective risks and trade-offs. And so to start off, we have a really great set of people to hear from today. So I thought we could kind of kick off with a round of introductions, if that sounds good. I'm Aditi, I work at Celestia. Go ahead.
Well, I'm Kelvin, I work at Optimism, as you can see.
Hey, I'm Joe, I'm one of the co-founders of Aztec. Happy to be here.
Val, product lead at Arbitrum.
I'm Louis, I'm an ecosystem lead at Starkware.
Hi, I'm Emily, I work at Fuel.
Great, thanks guys. So I thought to start off, the first question we could kick off with this is currently kind of what does the current developer experience of your rollup technology look like? And disclaimer that this is like what the current state is. We'll get to the ideal state in a little bit.
Cool. Yeah, so last year the developer experience was very different than it is now. We recently did a major upgrade last year in November that drastically changed things, and essentially we redesigned the whole thing from scratch, and now Optimism essentially just runs Geth under the hood with some small modifications. So for the most part, the developer experience of working on Optimism is essentially equivalent to the experience of working on Ethereum, down to every opcode costs the same amount of gas, right? So things just work. Very nice architecture, and the goal in the future is to keep minimizing, so we get closer and closer to just Geth with a minimal number of changes.
Cool. So on Aztec, it's a bit similar, but with a big difference. So to interact with our rollup, it's on L1 actually. So you just write a Solidity bridge contract. It's a limited interface of 2 tokens in, 2 tokens out. But you can have like one major benefit, which is the execution environment is L1. So you don't need to move all of DeFi to L2. Developers can just write a small 100-line bridge contract and interact with the entire L1 ecosystem with all of L1's liquidity. But again, yeah, it's working in Solidity with familiar tools with a simple bridge contract.
Arbitrum, whatever you would do on Ethereum L1, you would do the exact same thing on Arbitrum. Super easy.
So I'm going to have a slightly longer presentation in our case. So Starkware has its own language, and the tooling has been built basically the last 5 months. So let's say that we are getting to a point where it's comfortable to start working, to actually learn the language, but clearly in 2 months' time we'll be already in the other universe. And all the education on Cairo has been moving pretty fast, as well as Transpiler from Solidity to Cairo, although I always advise people to write in Cairo because they get best performance.
Fuel is building a language called Sway, which is a Rust-based smart contract language. It comes with a whole comprehensive suite of developer experience components. So it comes with a language server, a tool chain, an SDK, a VS Code plugin, really cool stuff that makes the developer experience nice.
I did not know that about Fuels. Wow, that's amazing. That sounds great. So it sounds like there's a mixed bag here. Some developer experience is seamless, kind of works as the L1 kind of works, and then there's some intricacies with the Starkware side of things on Cairo, and which is like a net new kind of smart contracts language specific to Starkware. So I guess in all your minds, what are kind of the 3 important aspects of developer experience on your rollup, and how does that tie into what the ideal looks like? I'm sure, as rollups are kind of new technology, they're in some ways limited in what they can do and how people are currently building on them. And so what are kind of the most 3 important things in your guys' perspective on things you can improve in the future to make the experience really, really great?
I can go first. I just have one. We're just focused on composability right now and adding privacy to something that already exists. So I think our main focus is kind of allowing developers to add to what already exists rather than reinventing the wheel. So I think between all of us as L2s, we need to kind of work out how to do kind of composability. And for us, we're just focused on that on L1 at the moment. But in the future, we'd love to deploy Aztec to maybe other L2s and become an L3 and figure out a way to do composability across different networks. But at the moment, it's just focusing on allowing developers to improve existing protocols.
For Arbitrum, I'd say it's bridging both fungible and non-fungible tokens. You can do both, but if you have a non-standard fungible token that is interest generating or does some other funky stuff, today some things can go wrong, and there are a lot of, long tail of use cases of what fungible tokens could do, and designing better for those.
And so, in the context of Starkware, I guess right now the main focus would be ideally would we be having a seamless experience where starting, writing, learning, Cairo, developing would be as seamless as something like Foundry. Our target is, as simple as possible.
For Fuel, I'd say that our focus is being friendly with the developer. For instance, our compiler can detect reentrancy issues, so it can detect if your code is violating the CEI pattern, and it lets you know as a developer that you may not want to deploy that contract as it may be vulnerable.
I want to double click into Louis' answer. How are you guys currently thinking about kind of advocacy and community in your whole approach, since you're kind of shipping something completely new in this space?
That's a very good question. So I'll be very clear today. Cairo is not for the faint of heart. It's for the people who like to eat glass. It's a bit of a joke because those people are also the ones who are the most rewarding. Like, they are building things that I made a presentation this morning showing what people have been building when they take advantage of this new language. They have been inventing things that cannot exist anywhere else. And so my answer to that is the language, the languages, tooling, everything will become simpler. But if you feel like you want to create something unique right now, you can start today. I mean, it doesn't prevent, there is a bunch of people here who can talk about that, independent from Starkware.
Awesome. What about the rest of you guys? Are you guys thinking about advocacy and kind of DevRel efforts in that realm? Because I think all of us here kind of have this belief that rollups will become this central usability layer of Web3, and so kind of interested in whether there's efforts there at all your projects.
I would say for Optimism, the key thing that we're trying to do is not change anything, right? Everyone here, we've been writing Solidity for years. Everyone knows how to use Solidity. I mean, maybe not everybody, but a lot more people than people know how to use custom languages. We know how to do it safely. There's half a decade's worth of tooling out there. So, at least 50% of it is the fact that the developer advocacy has already been done for us, right? So if you can write Solidity and, deploy contracts you can deploy on Optimism, that's half the work. And then, of course, there's always some net new things when it comes to these. With L2s, you have this bridging stuff, and that's kind of we really focus on just making the tooling for that bridging as easy as possible, and we just, we're going through a beta period with our new SDK to make that as easy as possible. But we essentially just talk to developers all day long and get feedback all day long and make sure that the system works the way people expect it to work, and in our case, that's making it work like Ethereum, right? So.
Yeah, I think for us, the main challenge is getting developers to care about privacy. I think everyone in the room who's written Solidity, by definition, is building an application that's public, and they're okay with users putting their data on chain. And we're kind of focusing our advocacy efforts around trying to get developers to think about what's being exposed. If you've got people coming onto your kind of application in a third world country, it's got a different rule of law, that can be kind of like a security risk, putting data on chain. So I think education around privacy is where we focus most of our efforts.
For Arbitrum, DevRel is everything. Without the devs, we would be nothing. One important thing that we really want to get across to all the devs is decentralization is a really important concept on your chain, and choose your chains wisely. Not all chains are created equal, and the quality of the chain is really important for the longevity of whatever project you're building, and just the longevity of the space in general, right? We want crypto to be a place where the masses feel happy, not a place that the masses feel is some sort of Ponzi scheme.
Can you repeat the question?
Huh?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, it was advocacy and community playing a role in.
Okay.
So you already answered that. You're good. Yeah. I think Emily, you also. But if you have anything to say, go ahead.
Well, I guess to add to what everybody said here, I feel like from a developer experience perspective, the developers are your consumers and the experience is your product. So I know at Fuel, and I imagine for others as well, that's really the focus from the developer experience perspective, is making that product good and communicating with the community about their experience with that product.
So, Joe, you actually touched on this a little bit around like educating developers on the importance of privacy. The way I see it, there's probably distinct DevX differences between application-specific rollups and general-purpose rollups. And so I'd love to hear from you on what you think those are, and if anyone else has thoughts, particularly Louis, on that, that would be great, especially with StarkX.
Yeah, I guess in the short term, we've kind of hidden the complexity of privacy and just kind of let the Aztec team deal with that. So we've like hidden it from developers by having our Aztec Connect bridge, where you don't need to worry about cryptography and kind of how zero-knowledge proofs work. But long-term vision with kind of Aztec 3, we'll definitely have to kind of be more in Starkware's camp. We'll have to do a lot of education on how to use a new language and how to kind of teach people how to kind of do things you couldn't do in Solidity. I guess like so the short answer is, yeah, we've hidden it for now, which is not the long-term solution.
So I guess for Starkware, when it comes to application-specific, Starkware have been running the most successful at this point. I mean, I guess it's debatable, but that was the most one for the longest run. I guess the Rollup on Ethereum with DYDX and Sorare and Immutable and Diversify. And so what we see and believe when it comes to app-specific rollup is that some places need it, some application needs it. Like, we won't leave all on the same layer. It won't happen. What we believe at Starkware is the world will be, the future of blockchain will be layered and layered and layered of different applications, of different rollups rolling on top of each other. And so, which is what we publish with Fractal L3, and I want to thank my good friend at Aztec to say that they want to deploy on L3, because, that's something I would love to see. Some applications have specific needs for scale, specific needs for the way transactions get processed. And so, this as-specific rollup will continue to exist and will be probably one of probably the most used in the long run.
And what about in the case of a general purpose rollup like Arbitrum? Val, you're looking at me, I'd pick on you. What are the distinct, differences in your mind between something like Arbitrum and something more application specific? And how do you kind of rank those in terms of priority for Arbitrum specifically?
Do you mean general purpose versus... Of course, we take the mindset that general purpose is the way to go. Is there room in this world for very application-specific, ZK tech? Oh, absolutely. I think it's a wonderful technology, and it's really exciting. But there's a lot of benefits to more general-purpose apps, like composability.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? And Kelvin, I'd love to hear more about that from you as well. I know you're smiling. Yeah. The composability element, go for it. Val, or you? Anyone? About the composability element and why it's important?
Sure. You bought some NFTs. You're gaming in this NFT. This NFT is the thing that you're a play-to-earn game. This NFT is valuable to you because this is how you're creating status in this game. It could be even how you're creating your income. So, what is going to make this valuable to you? Well, if you can move this NFT from game to game, it's easier, of course, if it's on the same chain. What if you could use this NFT now and stake it or do other DeFi activities with it? Also very powerful. And composability gives you a lot more freedom. It gives a lot more depth to the economic experience that you can have on a platform. This is our mindset.
I fully agree with that. Composability gives all that purpose. But what maybe I wasn't clear when I say app specific doesn't exclude composability. For instance, we could have StarkX or StarkNet, which is run by a single entity. And those they can deploy their own application and settle back every time they need a user to withdraw. Withdrawal happen a lot less than settlement, for instance, on an exchange, or luckily for them. And so it's not independent. It's not orthogonal. You can have both.
Cool. Yeah, I have a slightly different take on this. I think that the real benefit of sort of these simple general purpose systems, especially something that follows Ethereum, is just that it's way, that for a lot of people, it's just way easier to build this sort of stuff. I think that for application-specific chains, I think it makes sense. It's kind of like an optimization on top of a protocol. If you have a very, very solid protocol and you think that you can create, you can build your application-specific thing because you have the engineering talent to do it, fantastic. I think for the vast majority of people, I would say start building on something general purpose. Start building on something, especially if you've never deployed like a Solidity app before, or an app on any blockchain. Like Solidity is probably the simplest language you can learn to deploy smart contracts that people are actually going to understand what's going on. So for us, we just see it as a more accessible way to build applications. And I think there's definitely room for application-specific things as an optimization once you've been running for a long time. If you think that that's right for you, I probably wouldn't recommend it for somebody trying to deploy their first project onto one of these systems.
So, Kelvin, you touched on this, that as like a first-timer developer, kind of using something more general purpose might remove a lot of the barriers to entry, especially with something as complex as building a rollup. Curious for like the application-specific rollups, like what prerequisites in your minds, Joe and Louis, are supremely necessary for a developer to be really successful with something like Starkware and Aztec? And Fuel as well.
Simply an interest in crypto. I think that if your developer experience is welcoming, then there really should be no hard prerequisites for getting started. It should be simply that the person is interested and that your developer experience allows them to go through the necessary steps to perform their first contract end to end.
I think for us, it's like a keen interest in a part of L1 that you want to make better. I think we've had a lot of people apply to our grants program, and they write these kind of simple bridge contracts, but I think the overarching theme is they're part of a DeFi projects community, and they're frustrated with gas fees or a lack of privacy, and that's the motivation for kind of working with Aztec, because they see a way to make it better. So I think, yeah, an interest in crypto or making something, an improvement, is usually sufficient for us.
So, can you repeat? I have a very short attention span.
Of course. No, what prerequisites in your mind are necessary for someone to be super successful on an application-specific rollup?
Got it. So, truly, from what I saw from running this community, trying to get on board more and more dev, and so far I'm being actually so surprised by the quality of the project, the people coming up. What you just need is seriously ambition. I've seen junior dev just showing up, just picking up the language, senior dev, people from the top company, the top brain of wanting to join Web3 and getting excited because they can build something that couldn't do before. So what you need, I guess it's everywhere the same. It's excitement, ambition, and will.
So I think of Near when I think of really interesting kind of go-to-market docs and Gitpod tutorials on helping people get started with Near. They've done a really great job on their developer portal. What things do you guys think outside of the typical docs and content are super necessary to make a roll-ups adoption really successful with developers?
At Fuel, we really focus on the tech interacting with the developer. So our compiler that compiles Sway is really interactive, friendly, and verbose, and will give you warnings about your code, warnings about how your contract will act once it's deployed, and allows you to perform at your optimal level interacting with the tech. I really feel like The worst thing that could happen is that a silent error happens and the developer doesn't expect that and they deploy it and they don't know what's wrong. So I really feel like getting feedback during development is quite important.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a very, like the answers are going to differ depending on which system you're on. I'd say, for a system that's trying to be as close to Ethereum as possible, the best thing you can do is just like show people that that's true and like just get them to start, get them to take the thing that they already deployed and then just deploy it again and be like, oh, it just works. You didn't have to do anything, right? That's one thing. And then the other thing I think is that when developers are deciding whether they're going to build on a system, they don't only want to see that the system works now, but like building on a system is a really big commitment. So we have to do a lot of work in trying to sort of explain to people how we're going to make sure that the system continues to work reliably into the future, right? People build on Ethereum because it's super reliable. People are building on these systems now because it's cheap, but a lot of people, that's a big commitment. If you're going to do something, a lot of people will just deploy on one chain to start. So if you're going to pick that chain, it better be a reliable chain if you're going to be on there for a while. So there's this whole area of work that we do, which is purely focused around making it clear to developers, like the system is reliable and we have a roadmap to make the system even better and cheaper in the future. That's, yeah.
I think I just add one thing, which is just be upfront and honest about like the capabilities. Like the worst thing for a developer is kind of you start down a road and you start building something, promising it's possible, and then it's not possible. So I think, don't waste developers' time and just kind of be upfront. Like you can do certain things today on a network, and then in a year you'll be able to do other things, and kind of lay that out for people so they can make informed choices. Not kind of just over market to them.
The question was about developer experience.
Oh man, what are the things outside of like traditional like docs and content that you're thinking about when trying to get adoption from developers or mind share from developers when launching your rollup?
Yeah, honestly, reliability is the biggest one, and then we really wanted a plug-and-play system that was no code. Anything that you wrote on L1, you don't have to write any code, and you can just deploy it on Arbitrum. Like, why not try it? What's the risk?
That's awesome.
And so I guess Starkware has a completely different system, different architecture, a different inner process, different language, different programming patterns, or computing paradigm. So in our case, I guess different from the other people on the table here, on the panel here, is that we need to explain how the tech work, what do they do, what they can do, what do they gain by working with us versus other solution. Like for instance, on Starknet, for instance, the thing that you get for free is cold data. Cold data is free, almost free. Like it's simplification, but it's very, very cheap as opposed to under L1, for instance. Or computation is cheap because you don't have to repeat it over time. And so explaining what kind of programming pattern they can use and build on is very fundamental. And another thing that is fundamental from my perspective also is, as was said before, honesty. Honesty of what you can do, what you cannot do. And I'm going to bring sort of a hot take here, which is I don't believe that any layers which have successful DeFi activity will be cheap in the long run. It won't happen because Solana showed it. Solana showed it that there is an arbitrage there is like a fee, like an equilibrium in the fees by arbitraging always the exchange based on the fees, basically. The cheaper the fee, the better you are at continuous arbitraging. So what I'm going to say here is cheap is great, but building new is fun.
Kelvin has something to say.
Yeah, if you don't think it's going to be cheap, I don't think you're thinking big enough. Like, it's got to be cheap. You got to keep working. I don't think it's...
So
it's going to be cheap. We're going to make it
relative,
cheap.
Right? Cheap is relative. When you're a whale, sending $100 is cheap. Like sending $1 million is cheap at $100, right? You get the best security, you get the best connection. But if you are to be, let's say, a game which has thousands of transactions, which has very, very little value, and you have to compete on the transaction fees with successful economical interaction with DeFi, you're not going to make it. It's not going to happen. I'm going to give an example from L1. If you remember 2016, Ether Delta, Fork Delta. There was a super good, awesome, decentralized, order book-based exchange available, fully decentralized. Before IMM, before Uniswap, before anything that we know today. And it's unusable. It's unusable because if went up. It's unusable because the fees are up. So this is what I'm going for here. I'm saying that this is why we believe in a layer network, where you settle back with more asynchronicity, where you settle back and forth. But in the long run, this is why, that's why we believe in a layer network.
I think it's totally possible to construct a system where you can have different state spaces and you can have synchronous interaction between them. And I think that's how you're going to get really, really cheap transactions. So, you know, that's long-term future plans for Optimism. We'll get there. But
As Polygon.
well, but Polygon is multiple different chains.
See,
You can do it with one chain. You know, we'll write a paper about it.
Quite a bunch of opinions here. I think we're out of minutes, so I think that's about it. All right, thanks, guys.